on what the world is coming to. Afternoons with Rob Breakenridge. Call or text 403-974-8255. Out-of-town calls 1-800-563-7770. Afternoons with Rob Breakenridge. 770 CHQR.
Well, we are 1 week away from Election Day here in Alberta, although advance polls are open this week. My next guest is in the fight of her political life, attempting to win another term in office as Premier of Alberta. NDP leader Rachel Notley is in studio with us here this afternoon. Madam Premier, great to have you with us here. Welcome to the program.
It's good to be here.
Just a week to go. Feels like it's been a long campaign. We're in the home stretch of this now.
Yeah, I think it depends on who you are and what you've been doing in the campaign, but I will acknowledge that some days it feels like it's been going on for a long time, and other days it feels like it just started yesterday. Right.
Now, you were wearing the Premier's hat a little bit today, pushing back on C69 and C48. What do you say to accusations, though, that you've been slow to push back on these issues, or that we really don't have anything to show for those efforts? Both those pieces of legislation still exist as originally written.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that it's definitely not true that we've been slow to push back. We've been engaging as very fulsome way on both of those issues from day one, outlining exactly the reasons why neither are good for Alberta or good for the energy industry or good for Canada. C69, as you know, I was in Ottawa about 2 months ago, speaking directly to the committee there on the problems with C69. And before going, of course, we'd been working very closely with a number of probably surprising allies, if you were looking at me and considering who my allies would be, but allies nonetheless, to put together sort of a suite of amendments that laid out a pretty reasonable path forward that the federal government could adopt in order to fix C69 and allow development to continue and investment to have some confidence. And as far as C48 goes, as you know, they hadn't even planned to have hearings in Alberta. And we called on them very quickly and called them out for that. And so now we know that they're coming in May to hold hearings on C48. And so Albertans will get a chance to be heard. And I think that there's a lot of room for change and amendment there if it even continues going forward.
Right. But I mean, these things remain ifs. I think if we were in a situation where there had been changes to those laws and we had made progress on pipelines, that it's something you'd be holding up as a win. So doesn't it represent a failure then that we don't have anything to show for?
Not at all. Not at all. You know, I mean, listen, I would love if we'd been able to snap our fingers and get pipelines. And I share the frustrations that many people in Alberta have around the delay on pipelines. But let us remember, we haven't had a pipeline built to Canadian Tidewater in over 60 years. We had NEB approval, we had federal government approval, we had shovels in the ground, and then the court came along last August and said, nope, you got to reconsider. But let us remember that the court basically identified two sources of problems when they did that. They said, you, Justin Trudeau, messed up in terms of consulting, and you, Stephen Harper and Jason Kenney, messed up in terms of the mandate given to the NEB in the first place. Now, the only upside, if you can call it that, from that decision is that it laid out a pretty clear set of instructions to the federal government currently on how to get back to a place that where the court would find it acceptable. So now they're following their instructions. They're assembling their pipeline kit. And it's not as far along as it should be, but it is closer than it ever has been before. And I do believe, and you've heard me say it, that we will have shovels back in the ground this fall.
But we don't know that.
All I can say is what we know is we're a heck of a lot closer than we have been before, and that is something we do know.
In terms of the economy, I think any government that's asking to be reelected has a legacy to defend. And I think it's fair to say that the incumbent has some accountability, some responsibility for the state of affairs. So to what degree would you say that your government bears responsibility for the state of the economy?
Oh, I think, to a large degree. I mean, there's no question that when you're in government, first of all, we have an obligation to be accountable. And people, of course, are going to be upset when the economy goes south, regardless of whether it was something that we could entirely control. then obviously you have to be accountable, and I've tried to be as accountable as I can. When we got elected, as you know, the price of oil was in free fall. It went a lot lower than even the Conservatives had thought it would go when they decided to call the election a year earlier than legislatively expected or required. And we saw about a $10 billion loss in revenue in the first year. And of course, we saw probably 100,000 jobs go. So we had a choice to make. We had a choice, and the choice that we made was to have Albertans back and to not make the problem worse. So we invested in infrastructure that was overdue, like the cancer center here in Calgary, and in protecting our hospitals and our schools, and also in supporting a great deal of diversification. So when of course, there are people still looking for work, and I think about those folks all the time. But I think it's also not unreasonable to look at what's happened in Saskatchewan, who adopted a very different approach. And their economy is not doing as well as ours. They're not creating jobs the way we are.
Well, their unemployment is lower than ours.
Well, it's because they're coming here. I mean, we have in-migration from Saskatchewan. We have more people working now than we did before the drop of the price of oil. The reason the unemployment rate is high is because people are still flocking to Alberta because we've led the country in economic growth in the 2 previous years. But overall, what we're seeing is that, but actually, I'm not even going to say that. What we know is that things have stalled, and it is our responsibility to do better. And also, I think that going forward, we have a more concrete plan for job creation and also protecting our economy from the ups and downs of the price in oil, something that we should have been doing a lot better for the last couple of decades.
We heard from the Calgary Chamber earlier today. The Calgary and Edmonton Chambers have released a joint position paper today, that they want to see policies that are going to encourage business development. And they're concerned that we've imposed too many costs on businesses, the carbon tax, the increase in the corporate tax rate, the minimum wage increases, a lot of regulation. I mean, what can you point to say, here's how we've helped to ease the burden on business and unleash that job growth?
Well, I think it's a number of things. I think, first of all, what we need to remember is that in Alberta, we still enjoy an $11 billion tax advantage on a per capita basis relative to the next lowest tax province in the country, let alone the average tax or any of those ones. So we have maintained that tax advantage. We've cut the small business tax by 1/3. We have made investment capital available for a number of different businesses in a number of different settings. We've introduced the capital investment tax credit and the investment tax credit. And we have done a focused investment and set of incentives on things like energy diversification, like tech, like supporting our post-secondary in strategic areas where they're looking for trained employees. So we have done things. No, we have not embarked upon a race to the bottom. That's not the way we're going to grow our economy in Alberta. We will never win the race to the bottom.
What's the difference between being competitive and a race to the bottom, right? I mean, you talk about areas where we are competitive. Don't we want to be competitive?
Well, that's a very interesting question. So I think we are competitive because we still have a very robust system of public education. I think we're competitive because we have a good healthcare system. I think we're competitive because we're going to bring in probably the single most effective economic shot in the arm that any government can ever bring in, which is a province-wide $25 a day childcare system. Those things also attract investment. And at the same time, they also contribute to the quality of life of people. We don't want to compete with the most impoverished states in the United States. We want to be a leader. And so that's the difference between the race to the bottom and being competitive. And we are competitive, but I don't think we need to embark on the race to the bottom.
All right. Well, in terms of paying for those programs and the approach you've taken as Premier, I mean, you campaigned on a promise to have a balanced budget by now. That obviously didn't happen.
No, that's quite true. And we were fairly clear with that very early on that it wasn't going to happen. So about 2 years into our mandate, we released our path to balance. And we said we would be back in balance by 2023. We have since then met or exceeded our targets with respect to that path to balance every year. And in fact, as you know, in February, Minister Ceci was able to announce that we exceeded this year's target by at least $1.9 billion. Now, that's in contrast to my primary opponent, who originally said he was going to balance the budget only 1 year earlier. And now, while issuing repeated amendments to his platform, is now saying he doesn't have a path to balance. He's just going to contract it out to a bunch of people after the election, and we should just trust him. We've laid out a path, and it involves protecting our healthcare, protecting our education, and adopting a reasonable approach to getting back in balance. Which the other thing to remember is we have the best balance sheet in the country now, and we will in 2023 as well.
But it also relies on a rebound in oil revenues, that we're still on this roller coaster that you've talked a lot about us getting off of. Is there a plan to get off of that?
Well, I mean, that's a really good point, and I would have liked to have gotten off it sooner, but, there's a lot of different pressures that we're managing at the same time. That's why we're investing in the single biggest made in Alberta energy diversification plan since the days of Peter Lougheed. And that plan, building off of what we've already done over the last 3 years, would see a $7 billion package of incentives bringing in about $70 billion of private sector investment by 2030. All of it in upgrading and refining and processing our natural resources. And so it acts as a hedge, because if we're in the business of refining or upgrading or processing, when the commodity price goes down, the processor actually makes more money. And so finally, those jobs would resist the vulnerability that happens when the international commodity price goes up and down. So I've been in Alberta my whole life, and I've heard people talk about why can't we do this for decades. And I'm very proud that our plan plans to do that. And that's how we get off the roller coaster.
Right. The promises you made during this campaign seem to be above and beyond what was committed to in recent budgets. Are we talking about additional promises that you're going to have to find additional funds for?
Not at all. Certainly it's above and beyond the budget that we introduced in 2018. But if you look at our path to balance that was introduced in Q3, everything in there is funded. And so it's all part of that.
The credit downgrades that we've seen, and the market's suggesting that they don't see a plan that they can have confidence in. What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, different credit agencies have different projections. We do see some of them saying that we do still have the best balance sheet in the country, and that we are also planning outward, and we're more transparent than any other jurisdiction in the country in terms of how much information we give. And so that's what we're doing. I know the credit agencies would like to see us bring in a sales tax. I mean, that is what would get our credit rating back up to a AA or whatever. But I am not going to bring in a sales tax. So that's just is what it is.
So you're committed to not bringing a sales tax?
That's right. Yeah.
But the carbon tax remains. Is that going to increase in the future?
Well, I do want to clarify that, because, of course, Mr. Kenney loves to go on about that. But when Mr. Kenney says that, what he should say is, Premier Notley is going to increase the carbon tax because she is going to succeed in getting a pipeline to Tidewater, and she deserves credit for getting a pipeline to Tidewater. Now, strangely, he never actually says that when he says that. But I've been very clear that we will buy into the increase in the carbon tax when we get a pipeline to Tidewater. And I believe that we'll be able to afford it when that happens. But I have not said that otherwise.
In terms of how you've approached this campaign, you've obviously mentioned your chief opponent several times during this conversation. What do you say to accusations that it's been a lot of negative campaigning? You've got a lot of ads that target Jason Kenney, I think 3 different websites that target Jason Kenney. Is it too negative? No, it's not too negative, but it is negative for sure. And there's no question it's different than the campaign last time when there was, Brian Jean and Jim Prentice. Mr. Kenney has brought in a number of unconventional elements to this campaign. And I think that the people of Alberta need to have a full understanding of what those are. And if they choose them, that is fine. It's not negative to talk about the facts. And the facts are, he has a number of candidates
that he is attracted to his party, who have articulated some disturbing views on matters of LGBTQ rights, on Islamophobia, on race, on women's rights, and so people need to know that. He also the campaign to the overall UCP leadership campaign is subject to investigation by the RCMP, and people need to know that as well. Now, they may still decide that's something that's okay with them, but I just don't think that we can have this campaign and somehow apologize for not ensuring that Albertans have those things in front of them.
Sure. And if you want to point to something that a candidate has said, including Jason Kenney, that's fair to me. What seems like over-the-top rhetoric when you've accused him of wanting American-style health care, or that you would have to have a credit card to access the new cancer center, that seems unfair to me.
No, because he's actually, that is very much linked to things he said. He's spoken with great admiration about the systems of surgeries that are, private surgeries that are
in Saskatchewan.
No, BC. So I understand the Saskatchewan model, but he's also talking about BC. And BC is where you have Brian Day's clinics, the Canby Clinic, and what happens there is people buy a membership into that clinic, and by paying for that membership,
out of province.
Right. So, but no, what they do is if they're membership there, then they get an accelerated access to certain publicly funded procedures. And so what it does is it creates, it's a way to use money to queue jump. And he has spoken favorably about that model. And it is that which on which I rest my assertion that is what he's interested in doing.
All right. And just in closing, you've been spending a lot of time in Calgary. Calgary's an obvious battleground in this election. Do you feel as though, given the changing dynamics from 4 years ago, that you would have to actually exceed what you managed to do in Calgary in 2015 to be successful?
In terms of the amount of support, absolutely. We'll have to get a higher level of support than we did last time. But, I'm cautiously optimistic. We're getting a great reception, and we're just going to keep campaigning and see what happens. I mean, I think our government has been there for Calgary, whether you're talking about Springbank, which quite frankly our opposition is all over the map on, the Bow River flood protection plan, our investment in the Calgary Cancer Institute, the Green Line. We've done a lot of things to stick up for the folks of Calgary, and we'll continue to do that.
All right. Madam Premier, thanks so much for coming in here today. All the best in the final week of the campaign.
Thank you.
P leader Rachel Notley. My name is Rob Breakenridge. Our number here, 403-974-8255. We're back with more right